A few years ago, my friends and I decided to spend a weekend in an old cabin we found online. It was advertised as rustic and secluded, which seemed perfect for escaping the hustle and bustle of city life. What we didn't anticipate was the nightmare that awaited us. We set off early on Friday, and as we drove deeper into the countryside, the road narrowed and twisted through dense woods. The GPS signal frequently dropped, and soon we were enveloped by an unending forest. By the time we arrived at the cabin, the sun was setting, casting eerie shadows over the dilapidated structure. The cabin, with its cracked paint and darkened windows, looked particularly foreboding in the fading light. Despite our attempts to keep things light with nervous laughter, a sense of dread was palpable. Inside, the cabin was just as decrepit, dusty furniture, creaky floorboards, and a musty smell filled the air. The silence was almost tangible, pressing in on us from all sides. We tried to shake off our unease by preparing a meal and lighting the fireplace. However, the oppressive quietness seemed to weigh us down. After dinner, we ventured into the surrounding woods, hoping to explore before darkness fell completely. The forest was dense, with the trees closing in and casting long, ominous shadows. Soon we stumbled upon a small clearing with a cluster of ancient gravestones, half buried and covered in moss. The faded inscriptions and the forgotten graves sent shivers down our spines. We hurried back to the cabin, trying to ignore the growing sense of foreboding. As night fell, we gathered around the fireplace, attempting to distract ourselves with games and stories. But the atmosphere was thick with unease. Suddenly, we heard a faint, shuffling noise outside, like someone or something moving around the cabin. The sound was methodical and persistent, as if it was deliberately trying to unsettle us. We decided to investigate. Opening the door, we were hit by the cold night air, and our flashlight revealed nothing but the dark, empty forest. The shuffling stopped as soon as we stepped outside, but the silence that followed was even more unnerving. We checked the perimeter of the cabin but found no signs of disturbance. Returning inside, we struggled to shake off the feeling of dread. The silence grew heavier, and every little noise seemed amplified. Eventually, we tried to sleep in the living room, surrounded by our sleeping bags. But sleep eluded us as we listened to the creaks and groans of the old cabin. Then, the footsteps began. The slow, deliberate steps above us on the loft were unmistakable. They moved methodically, as if someone or something was searching for us. Our fear escalated when the footsteps reached the top of the stairs and began descending. We scrambled to gather our things and fled the cabin, not daring to look back. We drove for miles in tense silence until we reached a motel. The next morning we returned to the cabin, but it was empty, with no signs of the night's events. The experience left us with an indelible sense of fear. Some places, it seemed, were better left undisturbed, for their shadows might follow you forever. Story 2. As summer drew to a close, my friend Mark and I decided to check out a secluded lake we had heard about from locals. It wasn't on any map and was deep in the forest. We expected solitude and tranquility, but what we encountered was far from peaceful. When we arrived, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the lake. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the sky and trees like glass. We set up camp on the shore and decided to fish before nightfall. The lake was eerily quiet, with no sounds of birds or insects, just the unsettling silence. As night fell, we noticed a figure on the shore. At first, it was just a dark shape, but soon we realized it was a man, standing motionless and staring directly at us. He wore old-fashioned clothes and held no fishing gear or flashlight. "Mark, look at that person on the shore," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark looked and frowned. "That's strange. I thought we were the only ones here. Maybe he's a local." The man remained still, and despite our attempts to focus on fishing, we couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. We returned to our camp, but as we approached, the figure had vanished into the darkness. Later that night, while in our tent, I heard strange noises outside. First, there were faint rustling sounds, then footsteps, growing louder and closer. The noise circled our camp, as if someone was deliberately checking on us. When we ventured outside, we saw the same figure standing near our tent. His presence was unnerving, and his face remained obscured in the shadows. In a panic, we quickly packed up and fled to the car. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, where we spent a sleepless night in a motel. The next morning, we returned to the lake, but everything seemed normal again. The lake looked serene and untroubled, but the terror of that night stayed with us. Every time I see a quiet, still lake now, I feel a pang of fear. Some secrets are best left undiscovered, and some places are better left alone, for the shadows they cast can linger long after you leave.